All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started here. We're putting out a couple more chairs if you want to find a seat, or you're more than welcome to stand in the back as well. Thanks. All right. So first of all, welcome to GSVlabs. My name is Kate Newton. I am the startup manager here at our San Mateo Innovation Center. And we're really happy to have you here. This is a always interesting topic for us, and it seems to be for lots of people. So we're always excited to kind of dive into fundraising. Before we do, see if my slide clicker works here. That's okay. I don't need my slides. Before we do, I'll just give you a quick spiel about GSVlabs if you don't know about us or it's your first time here. We had an open house today, so some of you I might have met for the first time. If I haven't met you yet, please don't be a stranger. Come chat afterwards. GSVlabs stands for Global Silicon Valley, and we are a global innovation platform working to connect startups, Fortune 500s, investors, service providers, all into one kind of innovation ecosystem. And so when we talk about connecting the world to Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley to the world, we think about Silicon Valley as more of a mindset rather than a place. So it's a mindset where kind of innovation and resources and capital have always been kind of concentrated. And so our goal is to kind of connect the entire kind of entrepreneurs globally to that mindset and those resources. And so we do that in a couple of different ways, one of which is our physical communities here. So we have about 150 startups that we support across our San Mateo Center and one in Boston as well. But another way we do that is actually now online with resources. So you might not know that GSVlabs launched GSV Passport in January of this year. And this is a digital streamlined version of a bunch of different resources that we provide, including access to a mentor network, investor network, key discounts and service providers, and education modules. And so we launched in January, and we've added about 1,000 members since then across 20 different countries. So growing pretty quickly. Check it out if you haven't already. And then in addition to that, one of those key features for us is called VC Connect. And so it's connecting early stage founders to the investment that's historically been concentrated here, but now investors have access to startups kind of emerging all over the world. So what we do is our founders can apply, give us a little bit of information. We build out kind of a digital profile for them and help connect them with over 500 different investors that we have on our platform right now. So kind of in that spirit, we are always kind of curious about the stories that especially early stage founders have with their fundraising experience and kind of spreading that knowledge around and seeing how we can build our support. So with that, we have a really great panel that I'd like to bring up. First, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Slater McLean. He is a product manager and startup director here. He's been working with our startup community for several years now, and is also one of the, not brainchild, brain parent of VC Connect, and kind of the way we connect investors. So hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. How's everyone doing? Good? Yeah. Thank you, Thomas. Cool. So we'll just dive right into it and get started. So I'm going to bring up our amazing panel that we have for you of some amazing founders that have done a really great job raising money. And we'll just chat about their experiences, and then we'll open it up for questions. And it's meant to be casual and conversational. So please, everyone, Greg, Neil, and Aaron, please come up and join us. Even though I just butchered your name after asking how to pronounce it 5 times in a row. So yeah, to get started, everyone should have microphones. Don't sit on them. I'm just going to have everyone kind of go down the line and introduce yourselves really quick and give just like a 2-sentence description of what your company is and what it does, and then how much funding you guys have raised. That would be awesome. So great.
You want me to start? I'll start. Okay. My name is Greg Moore. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fit3D and BodyBlock.ai. We're a 3D body scanning company with worldwide distribution. We've scanned over 1 million bodies, which is the largest data set of its kind. And we're using that data to help apparel companies size better fitting clothing and help you get the right fitting clothing as a consumer. We've raised $6.5-ish million. There.
Ahryun Moon, CEO and one of the co-founders of GoodTime.io. We are interview logistics platform, so we automate job interviews for internal recruiting teams at companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, Box, Shopify, Snapchat, and more. We've raised $7.2 million to date.
Hey, my name is Neil Serebryany. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Calypso AI. We specialize in cybersecurity for AI. We raised 2.4 million from Lightspeed and 8VC in our first round.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So I kind of want to go through all your experiences from beginning to end of fundraising, and we'll try and make it as concise as possible. But where I want to start is how do you kind of know when you should start fundraising, and when should you be thinking about raising money, and do you guys think you got it right or do you think you got it wrong? So Neil, why don't we start with you?
When you run out of money, or preferably before that, is probably important. No, but on a more serious note, there are a couple really important things. A, never raise while school is on break. So kind of July, August, really hard. December 15th, January 15th, really hard. Spring season, really, really hard. Basically, anytime VCs are enjoying their villas in Paris or wherever they want, you probably should not be fundraising. And then the amount that you're fundraising is fairly important as well. And the kind of narrative that you're spinning, because before a Series B, they're really making a bet in you as a founder, and they're making a bet in the market to some degree. But how are they making a bet on the technology or on the market when maximum they're spending 25 hours due diligencing it?
Definitely before you run out of money, for sure. We were, yeah, before Series Seed, we were literally, I was on the brink of breaking my 401k. I was a month away from not being able to pay for our rent next month, but the timing was perfect, so we were able to raise Series Seed. When we raised Series Seed, we were pre-revenue. We had a ton of interest from very great logos. So we were able to, we have a really great story around how much interest we were getting. For Series A, we got to a milestone that we wanted to get to in terms of ARR. That's when we knew we could raise. So.
Yeah, everything they said. So I think we have a hardware product. So ours was like, we couldn't get it off the ground without money because we had to build inventory and tool up and all this fun stuff, right? So I think our problems were significantly different than a lot of software founders out there. And so our money had to come from somewhere, or, we were rich in the past, I guess, but we weren't that. So at the end of the day, like we knew we needed to raise it. And so for us, it was all about painting a big vision about how we're going to utilize this hardware to just kind of scale and do something very aggressive and differentiating. And so for us, it was all about the narrative, as Neil brought up before, and we had to go through the right cycles, and choosing what amount to raise was really valuable for us because that helped us to narrow down who we're going after from an investor perspective. And then, to second everything else, as every founder will tell you, it's hard. So definitely before you run out of money is a good one. But also while you're hot, because while you're running out of money, you're normally not hot. And if you're not hot in the industry and you're not hot in the valley, then raising money is really, really hard. So you really want to do it on an upswing, normally before you run out of money, but also while things are going very well for you and you have a good narrative and a good story to pitch.
No, that's great. I think, you guys all mentioned, at least in some way, it was the story, it was kind of the narrative. So I'd like to kind of touch on how did you think about developing that narrative, and how many times did you have to present that narrative to investors before you kind of found that one investor that was willing to kind of bite the bullet and believe in the narrative and kind of take that further?
So this is something that I actually recently learned from our Series A investor. I didn't know why he invested in me until recently. So the story that resonated really well with him was, so I actually worked as a financial analyst in the past, and then I completely fell in love with engineering. And I was able to build something that was able to automate a really large portion of the work that I was doing as a financial analyst. That story gave our Series A investors some sense of how much grit I have, how much creativity I have, and no matter what the challenges, I will be able to overcome those challenges. So that was a really good kind of story around my kind of personal attributes. So that was one of the stories that resonated really well with him. Definitely, I think making it personal. Totally do not make it analytical. If you touch upon the analytical brain, they are very smart. They will call your bullshit. Definitely make it very, very personal. And then the reason why you're extremely passionate about the problem, I think that really goes a long way.
That's really, really interesting. Neil?
Yeah, so it's actually a really simple story for us. The whole founding team of our company was working in the intelligence community. I was at NGA, a couple of members of our team were at CIA, DARPA, IARPA, and we were really working on similar problems there and not really able to solve them inside of government. And so we kind of just realized that the best path towards solving what we're focused on was moving out west and starting a company.
Yes, it helps when you guys all work in the industry for that long.
Yeah, so it's funny. I have this like nomenclature of like, or this framework, and I think that good companies are acquired, not sold. And I think that you can take that framework and apply it to a lot of different things, right? So, for example, when you're trying to raise money, a lot of times you're not necessarily practicing your pitch. You're running your business, and if you're running your business, your pitch becomes native. You just get it. It just comes out of you. And so, if you're sitting in the mirror practicing your pitch, you're spending time on the wrong thing. You should be spending time on running your business, on growing your business, and doing what you set out to do. And that then becomes your story, that becomes your narrative, and that becomes your passion. And I think that that comes out as you're having those conversations and those stories. I see a lot of founders, and I sit on several boards and all this stuff, and when founders are sitting there going over their deck and over the deck and over the deck and changing financial model after financial model after financial model, they are wasting so much time. They need to be running their business. When you run your business, that just becomes a part of who you are, and the story just exudes out of you. And so I think that those are some things that very common mistakes that I see from, especially early stage founders, sort of in the seed and the pre-A, and it really gets in the way of what you're trying to do in the first place, which is not raise money, but run a company. So.
Yeah, I think that is phenomenal advice, Greg. And I think we see it a lot at GSVlabs, and we work with a lot of early stage companies, and there's definitely a
I guess I'll start this time. Yeah, so the founders and I made a point really early on, and we said when money comes in, that's not a milestone, right? That's a launch pad. And so we didn't look at it as like this success. We didn't throw a dinner for ourselves or whatever else. We said, screw that, like now we get to work. Now we have the capital, we can be strategic about how we spend it, and we move forward on it. And I think when you're raising your first rounds, a lot of the time the money's gonna kind of trickle in, because especially if you're a first-time founder, you have no clue what you're freaking doing. And so your lawyers hopefully are driving you through the process the right way. And if you don't have good lawyers for that, like get some, they will really help. And a lot of times you can kind of kick back some equity and you don't have to pay a ton of money up front. So you can negotiate with them too. And then like when you get the money from the first time, then it is less about the vision and more about the execution. And I think that as you're going for Series A, Series B, and on and on and on rounds after your seed, you're not necessarily pitching this futuristic vision that's just an idea. Now they're looking at like, how are you executing against that vision? How are you executing against your KPIs? And if you're not hitting those milestones, future fundraisers become next to impossible. So then it again goes back to how well you're executing on your business and adhering to your plans.
So once the first investor puts in their money, I think it definitely got easier, but it totally depends on your fundraising strategy. Our strategy was let's just get it done, get it over with. So our Series A, we were able to close it within 2 weeks, but our round was smaller than I probably would have liked it to be, but that was fine with us. We just wanted to get it over with. With the capital, we were pretty capital efficient. So with the capital that we have, we just wanted to, like you said, just to execute. serve our customers, build better products. So it totally depends on your strategy. Personally, my strategy was just let's get it over with. I don't want to be fundraising for 3 months when I am one of the 12 people in the team, and I was overseeing our sales team also. So again, I think it just kind of depends on your strategy.
Yeah, so we actually raised our round in 1 week. But before we actually raised our round, I spent probably a month and a half talking to people and getting advice. Getting advice is just code for, will you give me money, please? But instead of doing that, when you actually go out and you hit the bullet and you say, I want to fundraise, you want to get it done as soon as fast as possible because you really want to create a sense of FOMO to some degree. But when you're creating a sense of FOMO, you actually have to be really, really deliberate about it. It doesn't work with the top funds unless it's another top fund. But when you're talking about different funds, it becomes slightly easier. I really thought I knew everything about fundraising. I'd worked in venture for a while. I'm still an advisor to multiple venture funds. But as it turns out, it's very, very different from the perspective of running a company and kind of being there and sitting and facing VC funds than it is from the perspective of analyzing a deal or sitting on the other side of the table.
And to just kind of talk about that point a little bit, how did that affect your strategy when you're fundraising and talking?
One thing I do is I do the opposite of what YC recommends. I always do the opposite of what YC recommends. Well, it's really simple. Generally, people are really smart, and so they'll follow advice. But it's kind of like writing the college essay about your missionary trip. It's been done so many times that it's not actually very valuable anymore. The first thing I do anytime I pitch is I actually start by talking about all of the areas where we're awful as a company. I mention all of the areas that we're weak. I talk about pretty much any doubt that they potentially may have, and I try to allay it. Because I don't actually care about the meeting that I'm having with them. I care about the meeting that happens afterwards. When they're in their CRM, probably Affinity at this point, and they're actually looking and saying, do I believe in these guys? Do I trust these guys? And if as a founder you start with, we suck for these reasons, but here's how we're working on them, or here's how we're getting better, it really reduces the trust barrier.
It's interesting. Have either of you had similar experiences with fundraising, talking about your pitfalls?
Yeah, I think pitfalls are realities, right? I mean, everybody has pitfalls. We're not perfect, or else we wouldn't be here talking. And so I've never started with it. I think that's kind of a unique thing, and it's interesting, and I could see how that could be pretty valuable, frankly. But you definitely want to talk about them, right? Because at the end of the day, having an acknowledgement and being cognizant of your pitfalls is a really valuable thing. And it adds to the transparency that you are sharing with your investor, because so many people go in there and just pitch smoke. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to help your investor understand that that's not what you're doing, right? What you're doing is presenting opportunity, not presenting smoke that you can't execute on. So yeah, it's a really interesting point. I haven't started with it, so maybe if we do raise money again, maybe we'll go through that path.
It's called my list of reasons why not to invest in us, and I have it in every single fundraising pitch I have at the beginning of the pitch.
That's funny. That's cool. Interesting.
That's amazing. I've never heard that before either. That's a really, really good idea.
I could see YC not saying that.
No, fascinating. So you guys, now that you've kind of raised money and you're kind of on to this, next stage of building your businesses and things like that, what is the relationship like between you and your investors? Are they mentors?
Oh yeah. I overshare with our investors, so I pretty much share everything. I definitely am lucky that our investors are just amazing. They support us in every way possible, including GSV. So GSV has VC sister company. They invested in us as part of our Series A. Also, Bullpen, who led our Series A round, and also our Series Seed investors. They're just amazing, and I rely on them heavily, not only in terms of getting advice and feedback from them, but also, as a CEO of a startup, it's a roller coaster, right? So some emotional support, I just rely on them. I share a lot and I get a lot of advice from them. I don't take all the advice, but one of the reasons why I decided to work with our current investors is because they were operators before. So one of our investors, he made 3 companies public, and then another investor that I work with, he's been founders of all the companies, a lot of companies that people definitely recognize, and it's just their advice is gold to me. So I try to listen to them and rely on them.
So I don't actually send fundraising updates. I don't send update emails. I don't really like update emails, and I'm in Silicon Valley anyway, so I actually just make it a point to meet with all of our main investors roughly every 2 months or so, because I really prefer that one-to-one interaction and really spending an hour to go through the problems in our business, where we can improve, and really building out that relationship before we fundraise. The reason why we don't really fundraise is because we're always fundraising in some sense. We're always having conversations. We're always getting advice. We're always talking, but we're not sending updates because they're very impersonal, and frankly, they don't really share the full context of how we made our decisions, how we're thinking about where to move next, how to think about what makes sense for us to do as an organization.
I'll go. Yeah, so we do. We took care of a lot of this in like all the control docs when we raised our series, and wanted to make sure that we didn't have a lot of like audit-based controls atop of us, right? But at the same time, felt that it was really important to share information with our customers, but on a quarterly basis. And so we actually keep them, our investors, very, very much in a box in a sense. And we share information quarterly, and outside of that quarter, I reach out to them for specific things. But if they reach out to me for specific things, I want them to understand that we have set forward a roadmap that we've all agreed upon in the years before, and if we make changes to that, then we'll evaluate it. But other than that, it's very much of a push information setting. Now, we also have a board, and on that board is where we'll talk through a lot of the strategic initiatives that also has investors and then independent parties on it. But I'm not necessarily looking for my investors to create a lot of strategy for us. That's my job. And my job is to work with them to glean pieces of information that they may have that can help. But as Ahryun said, like you're going to get a lot of feedback. And most of it has nothing to do with what you're actually talking about, and a lot of it's like the flashy thing in the room. Because that's how a lot of the investor mind works, because that's how a lot of the community works. So it's really piecing through the information, making sure that it's appropriate to your business and your scale, and sharing what needs to be shared, being very transparent about especially things like numbers, and where you're going and where the pitfalls are, and talking through the pitfalls, but also making sure like you're cognizant about what's coming back, and you're using what you need to move forward.
That's awesome. So I think before we kind of open it up to questions from the audience and things like that, since you guys all mentioned advice and picking and choosing what advice you want to take, if you guys could give one piece of very practical.
It was create scarcity is probably the number one thing, and also raise when you're hot. When we had to raise, we didn't take it down round, but we had to raise like a sort of a bridge at one point, and it's just like pulling teeth. And it's one of those things like you really, when you're planning for your cash out dates and things like that, like you don't want to get close to that date. So as you're raising money, make sure that you're creating the scarcity while you're on the upswing, and do it while you're hot, and do it before you think you actually need to. So those are a couple of little bits of advice.
Can you just touch briefly on what it means to be hot? Like, is it is the
I mean, like here's the
space
definition.
hot? I
so
know.
just do this over here.
I'm the
right?
epitome of hot. I know, but you know what? Can you dive into that a
Yeah.
little bit more?
So I mean, like you're gonna have quarters where you're over budget, quarters where you're under budget, months where you're over and up, and you're like trending really high on whatever KPIs you push forward, right? However you're holding yourself accountable to your business. And so that's the definition that I would say of like being internally hot. Like that's where you're just hitting numbers above budget, and you want to share that information, get it out there. On the other hand, being externally hot is like where you've got PR pickup, where you've got other people talking to you about the media and whatever else, right? Like you're having inbound offers for equity coming into play. And that's another great time, assuming you can get the valuation that you need and the valuation that you want, and you can justify a fundraise at that time. if you're not doing that, like you're scratching so hard to try to raise money, and that's just, if it's too hard, it's not right, which is a crappy thing to say when you're in it, because you're like, crap, if I don't raise money, I don't have a company. But it's just like, I don't know, it's just a barometer to kind of think through as far as that stuff goes. So anyway, I like to raise while we're hot.
Makes sense. Ahryun?
I think when it comes to fundraising, like kind of like how you kind of open up your pitch with what the reasons why you shouldn't invest in your company, like that's super creative. There's definitely no do's and don'ts, I think, with fundraising. I got a ton of advice on how you should not cold call your investors. I ran out of all the warm contacts, so I just decided to cold call investors for Series A, and I was able to close my round with people that I met through cold emails that I sent. So there's definitely no do's and don'ts, just whatever it takes. That's my advice.
And Neil, you can skip this question since you already gave the best piece of advice, but if you want to give another one, we'd love to hear it.
Make sure that when you're actually fundraising, it's a short amount of time. The longer the fundraising process, the more painful it is to get traction, the more difficult it is to actually keep people excited about what you're doing. So make sure you're striking quickly. Kind of just echoes the advice that we're getting from Greg.
Yay. Oh, and do this.
Yeah.
You're good.
You'll be good. Also, sign up for VC Connect, and you'll raise your money. Shameless plug. I can't help it. But yeah, so why don't we open up for questions? I think we have about. Panelists, right here.
I understood about fundraising insight and lesson learned. How about co-founder? Choosing co-founders, because that's another trick in the startup world. If you do not have right co-founder, you are dead. Basically, that's what my experience.
You guys have any advice on co-founders?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I'm a big fan of like organic growth and sort of organic connectivity. And again, it's like if you're trying for a co-founder too hard, it's kind of like, what's the point? Like there needs to be synergy. You need to have a shared vision, and you need to understand like this isn't just going to be perfect. Like we're going to fuck up a lot. And if you don't stick together through that process, like it's just not going to matter. And so I've always been very successful at people that I've known that are also passionate about the things that I'm doing, but that fill holes that I have, right? Like I know nothing about web tech. I couldn't develop a line of JavaScript code to save my life. Yet I invented pitch tracking. So like when it comes to data science and algorithms and like heavy computer vision, I'm all over it. But I can't put that to the web anywhere. So I knew I needed that, right? So when I'm looking for partnerships and relationships and co-founders and whatever else, like I want to fill the holes that I have as a founder. The other thing is like they don't have to be co-founders, right? I think that's something that like early stage companies, like there's only a couple co-founders, but there's hundreds of people supporting your business by the time you're scaling. And so like just because they're an early stage employer or a partner or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that they need a co-founder tag. And I think that one of the first things we do is like we go shop for co-founders, and somebody's getting in it generally for the equity, not kind of for the vision. And so that's just some of the things that I've seen there.
I have two co-founders. One of them is my husband.
Yeah, it's easy. Do that. Or not. I don't know. You tell us.
Definitely do that. It's working out for us. And then the last co-founder, we were actually, three of us were a hackathon team. So we went to 3 or 4 hackathons together. We won 3 out of 4 hackathons together. And when you go to a hackathon, literally after 3 days of no sleep, you see the worst in people. And we survived through 3, 4 hackathons together, and that gave me a lot of confidence that we can make something great together.
Yeah, I think co-founders are overvalued. They're really, really important, but what's more important is filling the gaps that you have as a company, and you can fill that from advisors to mentors to investors to even hiring really, really strong employees. I'm very, very lucky to have a co-founder, and what we ended up finding is that he enjoys being an individual contributor more than he enjoys actually kind of leading a team. And so we came to an agreement, we came to a solution that enabled him to do that, while at the same time allowing him to be a really, really valuable and essential member of the team.
That's awesome. Next question. Yes. Oh, over there. Sorry.
Could any one of you three explain like the process of scaling your business even before going into asking for fundraising? Like, how was that experience for you guys? Does that make sense?
No.
Because ultimately, like, the way I thought about it, or the way I think about it, is you have to kind of be in a position where you're creating value, right? And you're creating a product before you can even go to the VC. Or maybe I'm wrong. So does that make sense? When did you know to like scale, to go ahead and grow the business and scale up, right?
That's a deep, complicated question, and would probably take days, not hours or minutes. But I think to your point, right, which is kind of like if you started back, like when do you start a company, right? And then like when do you try to grow that company, and when do you try to raise money, and like when do you have all these milestones that you kind of hit along the way. And I think, and I hate generic answers, but it really is kind of up to you. Like every business is going to have its own velocity. And VCs are going to have velocities that they look for. They're going to have areas that they look for. They're going to have, all that stuff. It's like, it really depends on what you're doing and where you see that scale coming from the velocity that you want out of your business. And you kind of have to pick it from there. I mean, Neil said this, I think you said this best, but maybe even you also, Ahryun. But there's no rule, right? And so it's like whatever feels right, and whatever is the right thing for you, your employees, the people around you, your support system, and whatever else is kind of like what makes sense. And then like, having close mentors and advisors that have kind of gone through that process before that can help you strategize for your specific use case, I think is really valuable. But in a general group, I think it's a delicate question. Yeah.
Next question.
Yeah. When you're fundraising, do you differentiate between the investors that you're talking to? I guess another way of looking at it is $1 from investor A. Is it the same as $1 from investor B, or do you have any preference?
I've talked too much.
Ahryun, Neil.
Yeah, of course. You always differentiate, and you can differentiate in a number of ways. One way is based on prestige or name. We're lucky enough to have investors with prestige, but we by no means made the decision to choose those investors because of their prestige. We just choose investors who, frankly, we'd enjoy spending time with. Do I want to grab beers? Do I want to be stuck on an island with the person? Realistically, that's how we choose who can teach us more, who can provide value in the best possible way. Beyond that, I don't know what else matters.
Yeah, I think also like there's not a ton of founders that have the choice. Like, let's be honest, right? There's a set of top tier funds, and they're going to go after specific categories and like the best of the best in that category. And so for the rest of all of the world that still needs to raise money somehow, some way, that's a very important point that Neil made, right? Which is that you're going to be spending time with these people, and so dollars from different people do matter, but you also need to run a business, and so you have to figure out like, do I really want to do this or not? Do I really want to spend this time here or not? But I also may not have another check in the background. So I think you have to weigh those odds and understand sort of the risk of bringing on money and like what that money's worth to you versus the risk of not bringing on money at all versus the opportunity that you have on the upside. So.
Any more questions?
So how many investors did you meet? How many term sheets did you got? How did you come up with the valuation?
I think on average, I met with 60 or so investors for each round. And then what was the other questions? For Series A, when we got the first term sheet, we signed it. And then Series seed also, I think, when we got the first term sheet, we were like, fine, we're gonna go happy with the terms, gonna move forward. We wanna go back to execution. And your third question,
How
what?
did you come up with the valuation?
Oh, valuation. There's no science behind it. Whatever you call it, to be honest. I've seen founders that call extremely high, kind of above beyond normal type of valuation, and they stick with it until they find the investor that's going to value them at that valuation. They're just not going to close their round. I've seen those founders, and I've seen founders that call lower than what they think they should be at to close faster. It really depends on it's what you call.
Yeah, I think like numbers-wise, I don't know, probably similar. Like, frankly, the first seed investor we ever talked to signed, which was pretty cool. And we just had set terms, right? As an open note at a discount, because like I don't know how to value this thing. We don't even have a business yet.
Hold your microphone up.
My apologies. Yeah, so in our seed round, like we just kind of left it open. We said we don't want to cap, we don't want to whatever else, and we'll just give you a discount on the next round. For the Series A, it's a lot more of a negotiation, and it kind of depends on how much money you're bringing in, because certain investors expect specific percentages of the company at specific rounds. And so, like, if you're way outside of that range or can't justify why you're out of that range, then you may as well not talk to them, because you're going to pitch something and be like, go away. Like, you haven't done your research on us. And so I think at the end of the day, you have to be able to justify it, and you have to be able to pitch a story that gets you to that point, but it should be something north of what you think you're worth. The other thing is when you raise your next round, you also then have to justify it again. And if you don't, like if you overvalue your company on the Series A, and you get this way high valuation because maybe you don't have an investor that's really intelligent or understands like how those things work, your Series B investors are going to come and be like, no freaking way. Then you have to take a down round, and then everything just goes to shit. And so, like, at the end of the day, I think it's good to plot a course for you, and like, where do you want this company to be, and do you think you can achieve that value by the time that you need to raise your next round, because you need to have a multiple of that so that nobody gets overly diluted. So I think cap table math is also a really important thing as you're starting to raise capital, and understanding like how those things scale out and how they trend.
No, that's awesome. I think we have time for one last question.
If you go back to when you needed seed funding, what is the guidance to new founders to convince potential investors to give you seed funding at the very beginning?
So I might be able to answer this one. We raised our first round of capital roughly 2 weeks after we incorporated as a company, and roughly a month and a half after we left government. So they're just taking a really, really big risk on you. People are, to some degree, depending on the fund, depending on the circumstances, they're betting their record, they're betting who they are on you. So it's really just about building that relationship of trust as quickly as possible. The other thing I'd recommend is having long established relationships. That's not always possible, but I found that's very, very helpful. Or having mutually connected circles of trusted business advisors, friends, what have you.
What was the question one more time? I'm sorry.
I was doing the same thing.
To give you seed funding at the very beginning.
At the very
To
beginning.
them that you are serious and you are honest.
Okay. Was 2 years ago.
Because that's where new founders need to know how to approach potential investors to get the first prototype done.
Yeah, how we raised Series C was just personally. You talking about yourself, how amazing you are, how amazing your product is, how many customers you are, you are about to close and everything. That doesn't weigh as much as someone else saying how great you are. So the investor that gave us the term sheet for Series Seed, he knew someone that was a really close friend and advisor to our business from the beginning, and he was able to do a lot of convincing on behalf of us. So we could have kind of like made this strategic, but it kind of naturally, organically happened that someone else was able to vouch for us, and we were able to kind of present all the evidence that this person was advocating us for. So that was how we were able to close our Series Seed. I don't know if that answered your question.
That someone was an advisor?
Yeah, he was an advisor. He became part of our. He actually angel invested in us also. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'll go back to the same adage, and I think that makes a ton of sense, right? Which is like deep. If you listen to both of them, it's like deep network relationships are by far the best thing that you can do. And while you're tooting your own horn, like it's always way better if somebody else does it. Same in sales, same as everything else, right? I could tell you I'm great, but if Slater tells you I'm great, like you're gonna believe him, not me, right? And that's real, that's life. And then the other side of it is that when you're just getting started, like you don't generally have a product, you generally don't have a team, you generally don't have like a lot of the things that people are quote unquote investing in you for. All you have is a vision, an idea, and a background, a history, right? And your history needs to say that I've done something really, really cool, or I am so freaking good at this that I can scale this thing out and basically tell the investors I can trust you based on some past experience. And so I think like going into it with those things, like having done something, having some lineage in your life is also a really good thing. I think one of the things that came out is like, first-time founders are not as young as most people would think. Like they're kind of in their mid-30s, the ones that are generally kind of successful. So generally you have a history, you have a past, right? And so you can kind of key on that past and help people to understand who you are. So anyway, I think like networking relationships is paramount. And I think like if you think you're going to go start a company, like begin talking to people about it. Begin talking to people that can advise you, can put money down, can create relationships for you. Those are powerful things. And then have a cool vision, cool story, and make sure it's a big opportunity in a big open space. Those are things that I think really help to move the needle there.
Awesome. Let's give a big round of applause to our awesome panel. And then there's drinks and food and, network with each other, talk, enjoy. Thank you guys so much for coming. I appreciate it.
That was awesome. Look, guys. Hearing about your story. Oh, we did the halfway. We'll just go for the. We'll go for the halfway.
There we go.
Ahryun, pleasure.
Nice meeting you.
That was awesome. Thank you guys so much.
That was fun.
I really appreciate it.
Get it. Take that.